So while we wait for people to come in, I just want to take some time to introduce myself and the speakers today, as well as just give you an overview of what the seminar series is. So my name is Gunjan Sondhi. I'm a lecturer in geography at the Open University, and I, alongside Professor Parvati Raghuram and Dr. Marcus Brainis, have organized this seminar series, which in fact is a response, or rather comes out of the fact that we couldn't undertake an initial workshop that we were going to run on writing academic papers, particularly around international student mobility, which was aimed at African scholars. So this workshop was supposed to be run last year in July, and for obvious reasons we couldn't. And so we decided that instead of just sort of waiting for things to sort out, we'll try and do some of the sessions online. And as part of that, we've had 4 sessions already that have looked at the different components of an academic paper. And the last session we looked at what sort of the behind the scenes of what the editorial processes are when you submit an academic paper to a more traditional conventional journal. And today we have with us Simon Batterbury, who will give us some insights into open access journal publishing. And we have Frankline, who will be giving us, sharing with us his experiences of what it is to publish in conventional as well as open access journals. So as people are coming in, I wonder if, Simon, if you would like to introduce yourself and, sort of start the discussion around open access, that would be great.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. So you might be wondering why you have a guy from Australia speaking to you about open access journals. I'm actually started my career in Africa, and I lived in Burkina Faso and Niger for some time. And later, when I became an academic and I finished my PhD, after a few years, I moved to Arizona, and I got very interested in one of the world's first social science open access journals, the Journal of Political Ecology. And I ended up being the editor a few years later. So at the end of my little talk, I'll tell you about that journal. And before that, we'll go through some of the things we need to know about open access publishing. Some are pretty straightforward, and some actually get quite political and complicated. So can everybody hear me?
Yes, you're coming through.
Fantastic. Shall I start the PowerPoint?
Yes, please.
Okay, share screen. How is that? Is that all right?
Yeah, that's coming out great. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm not going to say a great deal about in this formal talk, because you'll get pretty bored. I'm at the University of Melbourne, and I'm also a visiting prof at Lancaster University in the UK, where I spent a lot of time in the last 3 or 4 years. So what I'm going to do is guide you through just a few key points. So here's the first slide, and I think we will circulate these later. But just to reiterate, for those of you that don't know, open access journal publishing and even books is really the way that everything is heading at the moment. It's like CDs being replaced by MP3s. It's going pretty quick. And so we need to be aware of what's happening. It means that people can read your work and engage with it and cite it more effectively if your work is open access. I think it's the right thing to do, because many audiences can simply access your articles or your other materials on their phones, on their computers, assuming, of course, that they have access. So printed material is not dead, but it's slowly disappearing from universities and other institutions. The ethical point there is that also publishing is dominated by a few key players, which I'll come to later at that point, and they make a lot of money from publishing journals, either from you paying charges to them or from selling subscriptions to university libraries, and we're talking millions and millions and millions Also, open access means you don't have to go to places like Sci-Hub to try and find articles or trawl through sites like ResearchGate. You hope you can find your stuff more easily. But so the point of today is that open access is quite differentiated. It's not all the same. We don't just say, oh, wow, my article is open access. There's a lot to think about. So put this bar away so I can see my own slides. I can't do that. Open access publishing, the idea has become particularly important in Europe, where we have a thing called Coalition S or Plan S, which is requiring that if you are funded by a number of agencies in Europe and actually further afield, your work now must appear open access. And some of those foundations, you can see some there, will actually chip in for the costs of open access publishing. And they are beginning to disallow hybrid journals, the ones where the editor writes to you and says, thank you, we accept your article. Would you like to pay a large fee to have it made open access? So Plan S has done very well at trying to stamp out that sort of practice. So if you're not funded by these big agencies at the moment, it's not so much of a concern for you. OA journals, open access, emerged when the internet was invented, really, in about 92, 93, and they've been going ever since. And there's lots of large and small publishers involved. But the presence of things like ResearchGate and Academia EDU now means that it's very, very difficult for commercial publishers to keep your work hidden away. So even if you don't have an open access license, they know that it's possible for people to put it on ResearchGate or to put the preprint copy somewhere on the web. And this means that open access, large commercial publishers are now favoring open access publishing where the author pays. It's just simpler for them to move to this new system. So simply publishing open access is great, but it's the first stage in what I call social justice publishing. Because you retain your copyright, which is fantastic, which means you can remix your own material. You can, if somebody asks you for your work to be republished in a book, for example, you can give permission or you can refuse. You don't have to deal with the publisher at all. The sorts of journals I work with don't really charge anything to authors. They haven't replaced subscription fees with author fees. And some of them go up to about $500 US, which is actually quite steep. But many of them are actually free. And the point being that anyone can set up a journal these days. The software is free. You can purchase some web space and you can set one up. But what you need to avoid is anybody soliciting manuscripts, because many of those journals are not so good, and journals that you've never heard of, because they tend to be predatory. And I'll just come to a slide where I show you what I've done about that topic in a minute. I've actually created a sort of a master list for many social sciences. The more political side of this is, why would you publish critical social science in a journal owned by a company that you don't actually disapprove of, that perhaps exploits its workforce, or the academics who we all just provide content for free? Okay, it boosts our careers, but actually there is an ethical consideration there. And in Anglophone publishing, we're very beholden to certain publishers. There is, however, an effort in many respects, for example, the DORA agreement, which was founded in San Francisco, to deprioritize things like impact factors of journals in hiring and promotion. They want to get rid of those. They want to say that senior academics hiring should actually simply just look at the quality of your work and read your articles. And so that's an argument to make your articles good, but your place of publication would perhaps become a bit less important. I'm afraid we haven't quite got there yet. The academic system still says it's fantastic to publish in certain journals like Science and Nature in STEM disciplines. So there's a bit of a fundamental shift would be needed in our scholarly mindset if we were going to prioritize that type of way of thinking. So the big five publishers shown there control about 70% of publishing in the best articles in social science, and there's an article there you can read which gives you all the details about that. The other odd thing is that since the 80s, the cost of subscriptions to journals for libraries have increased by over 300% more than inflation rates. About a quarter of the world's journals are with societies, non-profits, smaller commercial companies, universities, or even individuals. So the one I run is owned by a university. This graph tracks the enormous rise of social science control by the big 4 or 5 companies, and social sciences is the dotted line. You can see it's just risen up. So I find that a bit troubling. So academic open access is a bit different. It includes journals in geography like ACME, also water alternatives, and a few of those explicitly state that they recognize that academics should be leading the charge to have a different way of publishing. And there's actually an radical open access movement which is based in Coventry, and there it is, and my journal is actually a part of that system. So here's my little contribution to all of this. I've spent hundreds of hours surfing the world to find academic journals which have good quality that you can rely on, and which charge you nothing to publish. They're open access, and the maximum charge you will find on these pages is about $500. So some of these have really good rankings and are completely free to publish and read. I think we're on the geography page at the moment. And you can see geographically they're spread all over the world. I'm just putting up ones here that allow you to publish in English. And if you look at the chat now, you can click on the link and find this page. And it really is pretty long. So here are some general social science ones. There's also a directory of open access, DOAJ, which lists open access journals around the world. It does include some of the ones that cost a lot of money, and they have over 10,000 journals listed now. In the Francophone and Spanish and Portuguese world, most journals actually are already open access. So Redalic and Cielo are largely Spanish and Portuguese language aggregator sites where you can simply search, and material, rather like DOAJ, material vested in the hundreds and thousands of journals which they have there, you can search, and they have quite good search engines. Open Edition is a French outfit. It has a few English language journals, but for the French speakers, I don't know if we have any, it's a very good place to look for, again, for free or very low cost journals. Right, so I run one called the Journal of Political Ecology. There's a little picture of it in the top, so it doesn't look very exceptional. But this is a journal that's completely DIY, and there's the link. It has double-blind refereeing. It has no major differences from other types of commercial journals, but it relies entirely on voluntary labor. Our budget is absolutely zero, nothing, absolutely nothing. It's produced on this laptop that I'm talking to you on now, and we do 60 academic articles. We have a very nice ranking, just a bit below journals like GeoForum and things like that. About 60 articles a year. The authors all retain copyright. And what is the difference from a commercial journal? It's probably that you get a lot more personal editorial communication, as long as myself or the other editor, Casey Walsh, have the time to do it. We don't have any word limits. We allow minor changes if you make a terrible mistake to your published paper. we simply go in and change it. That can be quite difficult with a commercial paper because there's a lot of issues there. And we link in our bibliographies to other open access material. So I check every single line of every bibliography and add in a DOI link or a URL so that people can access material there. And we also edit for content. So I might suggest a bit more vigorously to an author that really this paragraph is in the wrong place. It's to do with methodology. It belongs in the methodology section. So this is hard work. I don't recommend it to everybody, but just to show you that it's quite possible to publish in this sort of space. And we've had some pretty heavy hitting figures have published in our journal, and many ECRs and junior scholars as well. And some people have actually started their publishing in political ecology in our journal. It does move over to migration studies and so forth occasionally. We've had stuff on climate, refugees, and forced movements and so forth. And we publish in English, French, and Spanish as well. Here are some articles. So there's the famous Bob Jessup sent me a paper, which is down there. And Philippe Le Billon, some of you will know, and Rosalind Duffy from Sheffield. And some really interesting things have come out in the journal, and it's a pleasure to read them. So really, just to finish off, I think scholarly publishing, the key point here is, yes, there are early career anxieties about publishing, and Franklin will talk more about this in a minute, and the desire to secure posts, and there's lots of also academic ambition. And sometimes this means that the sorts of journals I run are just simply not favoured. The root problem is at the bottom. It's actually the old folk like me, it's the senior scholars who weigh place of publication over quality of publication when they're assessing your work for jobs and opportunities. And I think that's actually wrong. And the DORA declaration is designed, which my university has actually signed up to, is a way around that. Also, the sorts of work I do is not encouraged in academic careers. There's a very nice article about this by Ian Hay, Why Edit a Journal, Academic Irony and Paradox. And the irony is that it's a really important job, but it's not really recognized. But I won't dwell on that now for this audience. So it's the recommendations I have are try and publish open access if you can with a decent journal. If you have no money, have a look at my list. The ethical point is, I think that yes, open access journal articles should be free to read, and in my world that also means not really under the control of commercial publishers. I try to do my best on that. This saves our library budgets, it's socially just, and it doesn't cost you $3,000 to get your article published open access. There's lots of other recommendations. And I'll turn off the share screen.
Thank you so much for that, Simon. We've got, I believe, a couple of questions in the chat. If I could ask Fenella, if you'd like, you can unmute yourself and ask the question as well. And for others, if you'd like, you can either put the questions in the chat or you can use the raise hand function and I'll keep an eye out for that.
Hi, Simon. Thanks for your presentation and for the encouragement and for laying it out so clearly. I just wondered, what is the scope of other disciplines or topics that you cover in your specific journal?
Thanks. This journal was founded by applied anthropologists at the University of Arizona in 1994, and it's probably in the first 5 ever online open access journals. It was founded so early that PDF had actually not been invented at the time. And I took it on in 2003. And the editors always have a little bit of a say in what's published and what isn't. And I think in the early decades, it was very open. Environmental politics, resource management issues, general social critique, around inequalities in access to resources or water, things like that. I think what we've done as we've got more successful, we've basically said, if it's not political ecology, you should publish it somewhere else on one of those other journals on that long list. And so political ecology has a couple of roots in anthropology, in geography, and sociology, and even political science. And without going into too much detail, we pretty much restrict ourselves to people who can either show they're contributing to political ecology in some way, something new, or they're drawing upon it in their analysis. The other thing I would say is that there is a thing in publishing which is about the 40-80%, the 40-20% rule, I call it. So I've edited in excess of 500 papers now, and the average amount of empirical material in a political ecology article is about 60 to 70%. The rest is theories setting up the context. And you really have to do that second part. But occasionally we get a paper that about, for example, a territorial dispute in Africa about which almost nothing is written. The authors choose not to really engage massively with Western theories about territory because they've really they want to use their words to explain a particular conflict or a particular issue. And we actually occasionally publish papers like that. I may suggest that they add in a couple of references here and there, but that's an 80-20 type of paper. And that's something that I've discussed a lot with other editors. Many journals based in the West don't allow you to just talk about your own country and your own case study. You've actually got to frame it in literature. Quite a lot, up to 40% of the article.
I think we've got a couple of more questions in the chat box. So I believe, Ilyas, you're next. If you'd like to unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yeah, thank you very much for this presentation. It's really insightful and help us. It's just a matter of curiosity. I know that it's not your journal, but we have received a lot of invitation to publish in so many several journals, and they claim to be reviewed, but they are charged. So so my question is, are they reliable or not? What do you think on that?
Yeah, I said at the beginning of my talk, if somebody asks you to publish in a journal and you have a look through the email and it has a few characteristics, first of all, it will never mention that there will be a cost attached to publishing. It will cite its reputation in a way using not Scopus and not Web of Science, but something else. And the editorial board appears to be people that you have never heard of. Probably put it in your delete folder, because those are people who have started small companies around the world, realizing that there is some money in publishing. And I will admit there are a few really great papers that end up in those journals, but really not very many. And it doesn't, regardless of the quality of the work, they don't really do your reputation much good. Yeah, so that's why I produced this very long list of journals, because I've checked every single one. And most of them are run by university departments, academics, as a labor of love or as a very, as part of a scientific society or a university. So you have to be a bit careful.
And in case if you've missed it or you've joined in a bit later, at the top of the chat box, Simon's put in a list of decent open access journals. So if you can just click on that and go through that, and we'll put the link on the YouTube channel as well as on the website for you for future reference for the rest of you. I believe the next question is by Nadir. Nadir, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask the question.
Hi, Simon. Thanks very much for this fantastic presentation. I really admire your work because I follow you in the academia as well. Anyway, I mean, one of my question was regarding the recent debate in the Critical Geography Forum about this APC related and neoliberalization of this publishing. You certainly has shed a light on that. But my question was more related because they're pointing the fingers towards MDPI at some point, that whether MDPI is thing. I had opportunity to review several papers for sustainability and other few journals of MDPI. I found that really, and also I published one. So I mean, I have a very mixed experience of, I mean, the review process itself, and also the APC of this thing. And as a young academic, I would probably appreciate your, advice and your, a remark on the overall idea. Thank you.
So MDPI, I'm not going to comment on individual publishers' sort of ethics, but MDPI is a commercial enterprise with an office in Switzerland. It's basically mostly out of China. And I've watched over the years the APCs, the author processing charges, go up and up and up. And they've now hit a floor of about $900 US, which means you have to have that money unless they will give you an exemption. So that's one problem. The second problem is they're very keen on contacting you and asking you to submit papers. And the person to look at is Dan Brockington at Sheffield, who has done a very deep analysis of MDPI journals. And he has concluded that although there's been an exponential rise in numbers of papers published, the quality, as expressed through citations and so forth, appears to be moderately okay. And so the answer is probably you're moderately okay. Personally, I don't work with them, but I did actually prepare a paper. I never sent it off. And they're very fast. And some of the papers are actually pretty good. I think that's all I can say. I don't want to get too deep into individual.
No, thank you so much.
Absolutely. I got your answer. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Nadir. One final question before we hand over to Franklin. The question's from Amber. Amber, would you like to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yeah, hello. Thank you. It's great to see you, Simon.
Right.
And yeah, as I said in the chat, unfortunately, I joined the discussion a bit late, and so perhaps this is something that you addressed earlier. But of course, you will know, working within a kind of critical geographical tradition, that there are several stories of kind of radical critical journals that start out as non-commercial entities and then transition later in their lifespan. And so my question was, what measures do you take as an editor now to ensure the permanence of the journal as open access, and specifically as a non-commercial entity, thinking, in the future, for example, when you pass over your editorial duties? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Amber. And great to hear your voice. Nous sommes toujours vivants, despite the COVID. Okay, so basically, there's two parts to this. Permanence in journal terms means saving permanent copies at the British Library or Library of Congress, or with a commercial permanence server, which costs a little bit of money. And that makes sure that previous stuff never disappears. If the journal folds, it's always still there for the world to enjoy. So that's a kind of a librarian information issue. So I think we're fairly safe on those grounds. On the issue of succession and keeping a journal going, Laurie Berg at Acme also has, was concerned about this issue. And so you need to have a plan, basically. And what we've been thinking of is not so much, when we retire or finish. It's more, what's the community around us like. And I think what we've done is we've got a very sustainable community of people in political ecology, and many people wishing to assist with the journal. So I think we're probably okay. But I don't think, in commercial terms, you often have a 2-year term or a 3-year term or whatever. What I do is a very specialized job, which gets very little academic kudos. And I'm happy to do it for a little while longer. And we just need to find somebody, or a bunch of people who are prepared to do that. I think they're already there. They're already out there waiting in the wings. At the same time, we have changed our journal to address Global South issues a lot more, and we have a special section called Grassroots just starting, which is edited by a team of Global South scholars, and they have now just produced a web page. We will host the final articles, and those will be up to 3,000 words, and in 3 or 4 different languages. And we want to keep that partially separate, just in case there's any issues. But we've got now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people involved in editorial work. Yeah, okay. And somebody's asked about the list of journals. It's actually at the top of the chat.
Yeah, and I've also copied and pasted the link again at the bottom. So, and as I said, we'll post this up onto the website as well and the Twitter account so that people have access to it. Thanks so very much for this, Simon. I'm sure we'll come back to you as we move forward in the discussion. So at this point, if I could invite Franklin to speak about his experiences.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to present my personal experience when it comes to publishing. Thank you, Simon, for the wonderful presentation. I think I get to learn every day from you when I listen to your talks on open access. My name is Frankline. I'm currently a researcher at Batterbury University. I'm a Cameroonian, and I hold a PhD in human geography from the University of Melbourne under the supervision of Simon. My main areas of research interest include the political ecology of land and environmental resources, the political economy of land as well, in particular domestic political economy, agricultural transformation and development, forest-based livelihoods, and gender and access to rural resources in Africa. The structure of this presentation looks like this. I'm going to provide a brief introduction on why we choose open access, what determines the choice of open access journal, and some benefits and how it has helped me in my career, as well as some challenges that are involved, and a summary conclusion and some of the results of my work. Beginning with the introduction, again, I'm an African researcher working, in this part of the world, and with the ambition to continue to work in this part of the world, at least for some time. And I try to position myself, between the ideals of the Western world and the realities of many third world countries, including Africa. I see the whole idea around publication to be like producing an economic good. And just like every economic good, the basis of production is consumption. In other words, we produce for people to consume. And when you produce and the goods are not consumed, or they are consumed only by a particular group of people, that only goes to tell you that the very basis of production is not sufficiently met or achieved. Having said that, talking about publishing, as an author, we write because we want to convey a particular information, or we want to present some particular lines of arguments, or we want to inform people with particular situations or events happening around us. And the essence of it all is that the message we're trying to pass should reach those people that we're actually targeting. And most importantly, at no cost, if that is possible. As an African, I can imagine, someone trying to get access to a particular article, and in trying to do so, you have to sacrifice maybe 10 or 15 US dollars to access that particular document. That can be very challenging for mostly African scholars. And in the process, this inability, if you're unable to afford that subscription fee, if you're unable to afford, it means that in a way, the output or the contents of the information that you're trying to pass is going to be affected in one way or another. And recognizing this challenge, especially as an African, partly explains the reason why I tend to focus my attention towards publishing in open access journals. But also because I have plans, or I have that ambition to work in this part of the world, which is relatively very, very competitive compared to working in maybe many African universities. So in as much as I try to ensure that I publish in a way that is going to be easily accessible by all, there are also many factors that I take into consideration when publishing. But then, I think the ultimate goal for me to publish in open access journals is to allow for accessibility by everyone, especially those who cannot afford subscription fees. And especially, like I already indicated, many African-based scholars, including those who are outside or who are without institutional affiliation. I remember when I finished my PhD from the University of Melbourne, and I had a couple of papers to revise. I had to, because I had lost access to the university online library, I had to request for friends to send me PDF versions. So this is just an example of what many people who do not have affiliations or who are not affiliated to particular institutions that could provide them access to some of these materials face on a daily basis. Those outside academia, those working with organizations, especially non-governmental organizations. So I face a similar challenge. So I tend to position myself or to put myself in the shoes of some of those people. And also on numerous occasions, I have received requests from friends back there in Africa requesting that I send them particular versions of some documents simply because they couldn't afford a subscription fee. And these are just examples of some of the realities that some of these third world scholars they face back there in their different universities. And with open access, the most that they will bother about is just to have an internet to be able to access these articles. If people could successfully access and use materials as they need or as needed, then this fulfills the purpose of some of us publishing in the first place, because knowledge, like they say, is power. Now, there is often this question of what determines the choice of, or what determines my choice of choosing a particular open access journal. Unlike Simon, who is already well accomplished, I don't think he bothers that much when it comes to the choice of a journal, as long as the paper is good. But for someone like me, who is an early career researcher, still looking to build or to have a name out there, there are certain things I look for. I go after looking at the impact factor of that particular journal, looking at where the indexing is coming from, where it is indexed. Is it in the Web of Science, Scopus? If the answer is yes, then I tend to prioritize. When I have some kind of discussions with my friends who are also in academia, they tell me, "Oh, Franklin, sometimes you take a lot of risks to send in your papers to particular places." But I tell them I'm not afraid of my papers or my articles being rejected. It is just a learning process. And in the process, I tend to make good use of Professor Simon Batterbury's lists of open access journals. They've been quite helpful in directing me on where to publish. So a second, the second thing that determines the choice of where I have to publish is the type of journal, and is that I tend to read more about a particular journal before sending in my paper. I make sure that the journal that I want to send in my manuscript has some kind of interest in that particular paper, or in the arguments that I'm trying to make. And in doing so, I look at previously published journal articles, and as well as I also check for some names of some big guys, big authors who are also in the field of study, or who maybe perhaps I draw my inspirations from them. So I try to look for some of those names and those what has been published by that particular journal. But also the editorial list, because there are some journals that when I go through the editorial list, I can identify some names, and I also know where what they're actually publishing, as well as their main lines of arguments. So those are some of the things which I use before I determine where to send in my paper. Of course, it is very important that wherever I send my paper, I make sure that it falls within the scope of that particular journal. Now, the next question is, how does publishing in open access actually benefit or helps me in my career? The first and the most important thing or benefit is that it increases the visibility as well as the readership of the paper or my articles. I've received quite a number of invitations from many editors asking me to review journal articles for their journals. And surprisingly, sometimes most of these journals, they themselves are non-open access. On average, I receive at least 3 journal articles per year requesting for reviews. Another benefit, which I think is very important as an early career researcher, is that open access publishing enables me to reuse my data, especially especially as I'm engaged in mostly some case study research in Africa. When I publish in open access, I can always go back to use the maps which I used in previous articles. I can use some diagrams, some kind of background information, including the locality of the communities that I'm actually researching. So it helps me in many occasions to be able to reuse to make use of data which are used before. And another important benefit is that most often, especially at the time when I'm still at the universities, the cost or the APC charge, as they call it, is mostly borne by the university, sometimes by my boss. Simon was very generous when I was at the University of Melbourne. So I also take that as an opportunity, since I have someone or an institution to pay for me to publish in open access. And another important benefit, which I think is very, very interesting to me, is the fact that I'll sit without expecting, any message, and I just receive invitations from different organizations or from universities asking me to present a talk or, on particular topics, or they are also requesting me that maybe I take part in their seminars and in their meetings, which in most cases, most of these organizations, they tend to identify me through some of the publications that are open access. And most of these people are initially are unknown to me, and they can only get, or they tell me, oh, Franklin, we managed to, we saw this, your paper on, on this topic, and we are so delighted to hear from you, or to, to have a talk with us. And some have even asked me to engage in some form of joint projects and to also seek funding, which is very, very hard to get in the first place. Yeah, so those are some of the benefits when you publish in an open access journal. People can easily get to you, they can easily reach you, and they can easily read your work. They can also cite you in many places. And so far, I think the number of citations that I have in my articles, the maximum is coming from the journals, from the journals which are open access. However, there is a major challenge, which is that of affordability. It is expected that the author, pays for the publication, especially in some of those hybrid journals, like Simon indicated. And it's also this is very challenging for especially early career researchers without some form of support or subventions or grants to be able to afford some of these publication charges. And in my case, like I said already, I've been very fortunate to have people who pay for me. And more recently, my University of Orebro, has accepted to pay for 2 of my articles, costing over £4,000. All things being equal, I would never have been able to afford this cost at this time. So, in a nutshell, when writing, my goal is always to reach as many people as possible. And before I send out any article to any journal, I always try to research about that particular journal. And my choice of publishing in open access is a strategic one, because while I try to make sure that my article targets as many people as possible, I also, as an early career researcher, I also try to make sure that I publish in journals that have got some kind of reputation. And the choice of publishing in open access is justified on grounds of ensuring that what you actually produce is being consumed by those in need. Here are some of my publications for the past 5 years or so, from 2017 to 2021. Thank you very much for listening to this brief presentation.
Thank you so very much, Franklin. That was really, really, really insightful. And Simon sends his congratulations, which says, for publishing 4 of your PhD papers. So really incredible and very, very insightful. Thank you for this. Are there any immediate questions for Franklin or his experience of publishing that you may want to draw upon or learn from? No, well, in that case, I'll take this opportunity as a chair to ask some questions. I think my immediate question, or rather, especially for those who are just finishing their PhD and early career researchers, what kind of support did you get is there a difference in the support that you get when you submit a paper to an open access journal? And in particular, the ones that you've submitted to, as opposed to more conventional journals?
Well, I think the main support which you get is more of kind of detailed comment, and there's also a possibility for you to revise, even though I think I've got just 1 or 2 of my papers that the editor the reviewers actually recommended for like major revision. The rest have been minor revisions. So, yeah, but so I think the open access journals, they're a bit tolerant, or they're a bit friendly in their comments. To give the authors the opportunity to improve on the article. They are not only friendly, but they are also tolerant as well. Yeah, so they give the author the opportunity to make, as much revision as the author thinks is going to make the paper to, as editor thinks is going to make the paper to look better. Unlike most commercial journals, they might just make some 1 or 2 lines of comments, which sometimes even you, the author, do not even get. And which is very challenging, because when you adjust a comment and you send it back to them, they tell you maybe it's not fully addressed, or the comment is not properly adjusted, something like that. Yeah, so I think that's the major difference, which I noticed. Yeah.
Okay, great. There are 2 questions in the chat. If I could get Simon, Simon, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question. Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Franklin, for your presentation. I was asking whether your university do they accept your articles you published in the open access for promotion?
Why, like where I currently work?
Yes.
They don't. It doesn't really matter to them. But since, like I said, as an early career researcher, I look for the opportunity to publish to the best journal that I can. So, like recently, I submitted to Development Policy Review, which is like asking for a huge, amount of publication, and also with Journal of Modern African Studies, they're asking £2,000+ pounds. So I noticed that, okay, my university doesn't care, and then they are willing to afford or to pay for the cost. So I go for the best. I'm not sure. Is your question answered?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So to me, it's strategic. Like, if, for example, if I lose my job or my contract ends, of course, I will definitely go directly for a journal that is completely free and no cost, but with some degree of recognition. But if I know that, there is someone out there who can pay for me, then I go for those journals with big names.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
So it's a kind of opportunity which I'm also taking. I'm not like Simon. Simon is already accomplished, so he can do whatever he wants.
No, thank you so much for that. Thank you for that, Simon. I've got a question from Fenella. Fenella, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask the question.
Thank you, Franklin. Thanks for your presentation, for your insights, and congratulations on your publications. I'm really just wondering about turnaround time. I haven't published yet, striving to do so, and I hear that sometimes in the big journals the turnaround time can be a year or more. I'm wondering whether that might be quicker in open access, or does it depend on the specific journal or the editorial board?
Well, I think it depends on the specific journal, but also most of those commercial journals, they take a longer time, from my experience. Like Development Policy Review, you publish with them, your paper gets accepted, and they even put it, they tell you it's accepted, but it takes like 1 year to have it like published. So I think open access goes faster than the commercial. The editors and the reviewers, I think the reviewers, they like set a lot of a very strict deadlines to the editors, they set very strict deadlines to reviewers. They tell, in a very soft and nice language, we'll be glad to hear from you in the next maybe 30 days or so. Yeah, that's my experience.
Right. Thank you so much for that question, Fenella. Simon, just a couple of Franklin, there are just a couple of comments for you, as from the audience. I see Pavdi's hand is up. Pavdi.
Thanks for some great presentations. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So I wanted to, it's more of a comment really. In some ways, I feel like some of the things that we've been doing is what I would call a liberal solution, which is trying to, facilitate early career researchers to publish in highly cited or high impact factor journals, trying to make those processes as transparent as possible, and so on and so forth. But in effect, they're always about adding in African voices into that, into highly hierarchical systems. They don't challenge this hierarchical system at all. And I have to say huge thanks to Simon for actually getting in touch with us and saying, actually, you do need to challenge this as well as part of this. And so I just want to place it out there, the kind of limits of what we've been able to do, but also to ask for advice on, what are the solutions? Is a liberal solution a step? So a colleague of mine said, for instance, I don't think getting authors to help to write in the journals is what we should be doing. What we should be doing is telling the journals to rethink how they do their work. And actually, all the work should be based around the journals. And they're absolutely right. But is this a sort of, albeit a liberal solution, still a worthwhile one?
I think that might be a question for Simon and Franklin to think through, or a comment to think through. Simon, do you have any thoughts?
I think we take things in stages. So stage one is we improve our own publishing practices versus the publishing landscape. And I think it's only really a subset of people that can get involved in publishing as well as authoring. And so engagement with the kind of neoliberal publishing industry, it's probably a whole other seminar, isn't it, whether we talk about that. But I mean, look, I published a lot of papers, and I started publishing in ones which are very commercial, and I did quite well, and many people read those still, and I was young at the time, and I think age and experience has allowed me to do other things. As Franklin said, you can sort of publish wherever you like, when you have a decent job and some stuff behind you. And I suppose that's it's a reality that I don't want to push too much with my own students and early career researchers.
Great, thanks for that, Simon. I see a comment from Inesh, or rather a question from Inesh in the chat box. Inesh, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yeah, sorry, maybe my question is out of date, but I've been facing some challenges in my connection, so that's why I'm in and out. But my question is about selection of reviewers. If his journal has a particular criteria for select reviewers.
Simon, if you'd like to come in on that.
Oh yeah, briefly. A journal like ours has amassed a database of about 600 people who have reviewed for us in the past or authored articles. And we've been able to capture that in software, which was the OJS, which is the major free software that journals like ours use. And we've recently moved to JADE, which is run from Birkbeck College, which is another open source, open access. And we are able to transfer that reviewer database across. So we basically do what any journal does. And I think actually we might do it a bit better because we know so many people in quite a narrow academic field. You can always think, oh yeah, I know that, met that person 15 years ago at a conference. I wonder if they could review this paper about Chad or somewhere. And often that works.
Great, thank you so much. I don't see any other questions right now, so I might just take that opportunity to ask the question to both Franklin and Simon. I guess, Simon, as an editor, what, I guess, especially because our audience and the aim of this work, these sessions are to support African scholars, what are the expectations that you have? Are there differences in expectations of the kinds of papers that you receive, and the differences in support that you can provide to African scholars versus other scholars? And the question to Franklin related is, have you felt that there are differences in the support that you get from journals if there's a recognition that your work is, because of the focus of your work, the nature of your work, that somehow that's received differently? So maybe, sorry, go on.
Yeah, okay. So it's a tricky issue. That the stuff I said about people are coming from an academic system that doesn't allow them to go to kind of Western conferences, to fly around, to learn from different scholars, to have seminars and so forth. Often their knowledge base in their paper is a little bit more constrained. And yes, we will publish those, although we may make suggestions about where to look for ways to strengthen that and to make it more of interest to people from outside that country or region. In terms of language, I think one of my some of the other lecturers on here would probably say the same thing. I spend a lot of my time editing student work and also editing journal articles, and I do that for people who have English. I've had people with English as a fourth language publishing in our journal in English. We also give people the option to publish in French and Spanish. A few people take that up. So that's another thing we do, which helps some people in Africa, particularly the Francophone link there. And I go through line by line. So I actually read every single word of every single paper. And that's probably all I could say on that. There are kind of basic standards of communication that any journal has to adhere to so that the audience can actually understand what you're writing and doesn't get annoyed with your presentation. And the one thing that annoys me the most is people who do not do their reference lists correctly. And I spend many, many hours filling in gaps with half-written references, people who don't have the time. The thing that misses the most is the editors of the book in which a chapter appeared, or the page numbers, or quotations with so you can't actually find them. So that type of stuff is thing that anybody across the world, no matter where you're from, can improve, I think. But the content of the paper does differ by the region and the culture in which you have been socialized academically. And I think that's absolutely fine.
Thanks for that, Simon. Franklin?
Well, yeah, if I got your question, in terms of whether there's some kind of differences in the support that the different journals they provide, I think a major difference which I've noticed is in terms of the way they present the comments, the way the reviewers and the editor, the way they present the comments to the author. My experience is that with open access journal, the comments are usually very detailed, and the reviewer or the editor is mostly very maybe soft to say it, careful with encouraging with words, because at the end of the day, they summarize. The editor summarizes the comments of the reviewers, and also present his own thoughts about the paper. So I think they with open access, they're a bit friendly and relaxed when presenting the comments to the author. But again, it depends on the particular journal. That is why I always advise every person who is writing to always try to research the journal you want to send your manuscript to. Take particular notes. For example, I check if this journal, is too theoretical. If this particular journal likes case study research, if they want a blend of theory and the empirical materials. So I try to look at what the journal, that particular journal is actually after. In that way, it helps you also to reduce the comments that you're going to get from the reviewers, because there are some papers when sometimes when I submit a paper, I know I can determine some kind of comment that I'm going to have from that paper. In most cases, I'm 70% right. Sometimes I submit a paper, I know this paper is good. Maybe the empirical material is very good. It's going to be captivating to the reviewers. But again, it's theoretically very weak, or it's not, maybe the theoretical anchorage of that paper is not very strong. And sometimes I get it right when I receive the comments of the reviewer. So it's good when you take your time to actually read about that particular journal. You can even determine the kind of comments you're going to receive from the reviewers and from the editor. So I think, in a nutshell, you need to know a little bit about the journal, even though you will never know who is going to review the paper.
That's really helpful. And I think for those who may have attended the session last month, which was on conventional journals, one of the things that was highlighted was that cover letter that in which you sort of introduce the paper and send it to the journal. And it was suggested that was a very crucial component of the submission, because it sort of presents the paper and yourself to the editor to show that you have given some consideration to the journal itself. Do you think that also holds for open access journal as sort of a standard etiquette of, writing the cover letter? Or is it okay to, say, this is the paper I'm submitting? Thank you.
That's a tricky one. I'm not sure.
Simon, what about you? Do you think that cover letter makes a difference when you receive a paper as the editor?
Yes, I always read them. And it's nice when they show in there why we should publish the paper, and also whether it is actually anything to do with political ecology. I received one the other day about finance in a ministry of a country, and they said, here's our paper, and wrote a nice letter, but it didn't address what the journal is about, so rejected.
And I guess in follow up to that, and really reflecting on some of the other discussions we've had in this seminar, in the previous seminars, is do you recommend that people suggest their potential reviewers, or is that not a practice that you personally, as the editor, recommend?
We have enormous problems finding reviewers who are not too busy, or I'd say, this will probably shock you, but if I send out 100 review requests, I'd say 50 to 60 probably don't even dignify me with a response, yes or no, I will review the paper or not. And we have a few stalwart reviewers that review many each year. And recommendation of reviewers, I think people can put them, but I don't usually use them, only I think towards the end of the reviewing process, if we simply cannot source other people. And that's just a kind of you never know with those lists whether they're really genuine or whether it's actually your cousin or exactly who that is. So I tend to give people the benefit of the doubt, but we actually often don't need them.
In my experience, I think that request to suggest reviewers is a kind of formality. I actually doubt if editors actually make use of those names that you actually submit alongside your manuscript. I've published with some journals that actually requested for reviewers, but none of them actually ever considered any of the reviewers that I suggested. So I see it as a kind of formality. So sometimes if it's optional, I don't bother to suggest anyone.
Right. Thank you so much for that. I don't see any other comments or hands raised. Does anyone have any questions or comments? And while people are up, Fenella, if you'd just like to maybe unmute yourself and say out what you've just typed.
I just think in the light of, what both presenters have just said, if to me, if I hear somebody, the story like Simon just said about somebody sending something completely inappropriate, I think it's almost disrespectful. I think Franklin's approach shows respect for the journal because you're actually wanting to establish a working relationship with the journal, with the author, with the peer reviewers. So I think if as Franklin's approach, if you show you've done the necessary research and you're within the scope of the journal, I think it's a sign of respect for them, and in itself probably likely to make them more amenable to your submission. Yeah, just a thought.
Just to add to what Fenella has said, I think especially to some of us who are young scholars or early career researchers, it is very important that you address the comments of the reviewers in a very constructive way. Even if you disagree with them, you have to be very, very constructive, because at the end of the day, they are still the one to, in a way, to decide if that paper has to be published or, to give their recommendation to the editor. So it's very, very important as an author to be constructive in addressing the comments of the reviewers.
Now, do you have any tips and suggestions on how to do that, Franklin? I think that's a really, really important point. As I imagine everyone struggles with it, the most accomplished to the most sort of new authors. So do you have any sort of tips that you do, that you take on, that you practice, that would be helpful for people?
Well, I think there are a variety of ways to do it depending on the type of comment. For instance, if you say a comment that is maybe theoretically inclined, first of all, you remind the reviewer of his or her comment, and then you, if possible, remind the reviewer of what you wrote. If there's a kind of variance, a kind of disparity, you identify it, bring in the argument that you are trying to do it, what you're trying to say, re-echo the idea again. And then one way to do now, to make he or she to be satisfied, is to bring in other sources that might justify, that might support your argument, the argument that you're trying to make. That's one way to do it, bring in external sources to justify or to support your argument. Another way is to rephrase, because sometimes it could be the way you put it, it could be a matter of maybe language and the approach that you use. Another way is to rephrase, and then you clarify. So I think it depends on the kind of comments. It's difficult for me to give particular examples.
No, I think that's also just helpful as a reminder for people, as they're going through these processes, that considering and responding to the comments is also part of the process. Simon, do you have any suggestions on how people may respond to the reviewer comments and your process that goes through when you get comments, when you get the reviews back?
Yes, in our software, you can upload a letter, you can upload any files as a response, and the new software we use is actually better for this. And I do read the revised things. When people say I've made extensive revisions, this is one thing to watch out for. If you say in your letter, I have made extensive revisions to the article, here they are, according to the reviewer's comments, it's nice to have that table of reviewer comment on one side and the response that you've done on the other. If I'm forced to just read an article and I can't even see the track changes and there's no letter, that is actually quite annoying, and I might ask people to send me a little bit more information. I've also seen people who have had major revisions asked for, and then they have left on the track changes, and I realized they changed like 3 paragraphs and expecting the article to go through. So that's not a good practice. Yeah. And by the way, as a reviewer of maybe 30, 40 articles a year myself, I love, particularly with African papers, I love to see a map. Maybe it's geographical training, but so many people say, in this kingdom in the 14th century, I'm going to write about, a particular historical moment. I'm thinking now, I think that's in Mali, but I'm not really sure. And it's really good to have some reference, historical and geographical, so timelines as well as geographical stuff. It really it broadens the stuff out so a broader audience can understand. Last thing for me is, being an editor is part of a social contract. So I have responsibilities, so do the authors. I sometimes fail in my responsibilities, and it's usually a paper that is utterly difficult to find reviewers for. I've tried up to 14, 15, 16 reviewers. Nobody will review it. The author rightfully comes back and says, I've been waiting months. What's going on? So I've been trying, but I haven't succeeded. So essentially, I've failed. Similarly, on the author side, if I'd said, please, could you supply respond to reviewers and also clean up your reference list, and the reference list is still basically wrong, and I found 5 references in the text which are not in the reference list, that's a bit of a breach also. So we actually have to be nice to each other. So you don't want to be a harsh editor, and you don't want to be a massively harsh reviewer, but as I said, there's different players here and they all have to play their part.
No, that's really helpful, Simon. Actually, while I've got you here, it's sort of my pet peeve when it comes to journals is, especially references and bibliography, is that every journal seems to want their own version of it, and yet no one seems to supply any style sheets for bibliographic management softwares. So somehow there is still an expectation that someone needs to sit there, manually edit their reference list without using technology that's been made available. And I wonder if that added on to not just open access. This is not open access related. This is just more broadly related.
No, that's a general moan, and people have said this to us because we just used a very simple system that was a little bit like the transactions of the British geographers, very, very clear, straightforward, lowercase, looked very clean for references, but nobody could find that on the reference systems because it's quite unique. And so last year we changed to the standard APA thing, which is on EndNote and all of the different packages that you have, including the free ones. And that was partly, I was grudging about that, but I did it because I really thought that people were struggling with reference formatting. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I see a comment from Parvati. Parvati, did you want to unmute yourself?
I really like the social contract argument, because I think this is absolutely right, and that everybody is making a contract with a whole series of people in publishing a paper, and so much of, and thinking of the entire sort of community, the people whom you're writing about, being honest to them and for them, being honest to and for those who might read it, and whose lives could be changed by it. For me, I just feel, Gunjan says to me, every paper of yours is a manifesto, and I think, shouldn't every paper be a manifesto? Because if you're trying to, if you're spending so much time, up to a year, writing a paper, then you're doing it because you want to make people, to inform and influence. And I think thinking of that as informing and influencing with responsibility is kind of fundamental to thinking about research publications.
Yeah.
And it's got a front and it's got a back. So it's got all the people who come with you in the writing, how you framed your research question onwards, to all the way to the people who are kind of, doing the rendering work in China for papers that you've published, and the people who are sitting in tiny offices in India editing work for you. So you've got a whole lot of people who are with you on that journey. So authorship is always co-authorship.
Yes, and I think we've actually identified a potential paper topic, the social contract in publishing. I just thought of that just now, but I'm sure somebody's got there before us. is it Rawlsian justice or something? I've read it somewhere before. The Social Contract. There's a book called The Social Contract, isn't there? Yeah. Okay, we'll have to go offline and talk about that later.
No, Franklin, you put in a comment to the conversation if you just wanted to share that as well.
Yeah, I was just trying to say that reviewers are also part of that social contract, because the tendency is most often when we spend a lot of time and energy to come up with a piece and we submit it for publication, we get furious or sometimes nervous when we get feedback from the reviewers. Sometimes there are some feedbacks that when I read, when I receive from the editor, I spend like two weeks, just sleeping and feeling so frustrated, but at the same time, you must address those comments. So what I'm trying to say is that we should see those comments from reviewers as something that is there to help, make our write-up or our papers to look better or to read more interesting. Yeah, because it's for, like, when I sit back here and I receive a paper that I have a paper to review, I don't know where that paper is coming from. I don't know who is the author. So before I make one comment on a manuscript, I know exactly what I'm saying. So I also put myself in the place of, another reviewer who is looking at my paper. That reviewer doesn't know me. So I will not want to think that reviewer is going to make any kind of comment on my manuscript. So what I'm trying to say is that we should always take comments seriously and address them appropriately to the best of our abilities.
Excellent point. No, that's really helpful, Franklin. We've got one comment from, or rather question from Nadir. Nadir, if you'd like to unmute yourself and just ask your question.
Hi, thanks very much again. It was just because I found that both the speakers, they have been talking about this, recognition of the reviewers. And recently, again, as I follow the Critical Geography Forum, where I found that there is a, new debate about these Publons, the new, virtual portal, which is recognizing the review work for the academics. So whether you have any reflection on this sort of initiatives, because in the Critical Geography Forum, there were, some sort of suspicions about the Publons as well, that whether it is a new sort of virtual neoliberalism as well. So, yeah.
I can say something. So Publons was a small startup company that decided that reviewers' work was going unrecognized, and you could tabulate your reviews on there and either display them just to yourself or to the world, and then print them off when you're having your annual evaluations or whatever it is in a department. You could present them. I tried to do that, and my boss was very unimpressed by the fact that I'd reviewed many papers, because it's not core output, it's more input, I suppose, to research. But that aside, Publons was bought by Clarivate Analytics, which runs the Web of Science. And since that happened, you're actually providing Web of Science with a lot of data. And Publons now has advanced to become a very, it's still free to submit your work and everything, but it's part of a big data management company. And so, I forget the most recent variations, but I think it will, it's beginning to get into rankings and indexes and things like that a lot more. And what you do, I don't recommend that you ever put up the content of your review of a paper onto Publons. Just put your name and the fact that you did it. And many of the commercial journals have an automatic link so that you can say whether you would like the fact that you reviewed a paper to go onto Publons. I don't do that, but it produces lots of rankings. Like, it can show you who the most in your university, who the top reviewers are, and so forth. But I don't think it's entered the real kind of neoliberal performance-based university system fully, I don't think reviewing is valued enough.
No, thank you for that, Simon. I think one last question, because I realise we're getting to the end, and I think this might be for both Franklin and Simon. Benter, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask the question. No? Well, I'll read this out loud in case they're able to unmute themselves. The question is really about, well, I guess, Franklin, you've said it, it's about how do you actually, decide on which comments to take, and which comments, especially if the comments are from the reviewer, are taking the article away from what the author intends to be. So Franklin, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I would say...
You wrote it.
I will say that you never take any comment for granted. I'll say that again. And you must accommodate every comment. Whether you are agreeing or not, you just need to accommodate the comment, you address it, you clarify if need be. If a reviewer, for instance, makes a comment that which you think is beyond the scope of your study, remind the reviewer in a nice way of the limit of your study, and also make him or her to understand that this is a wonderful, brilliant suggestion, but you think is beyond the scope of the study. For instance, you're planning to write another paper which is going to look at those things, or you're working on a similar issue which you think is going to be better handled in that upcoming paper, something like that. It's just a way of recognition to let the person not feel that, oh, he or she has been saying something that doesn't make sense. So it's...
Okay. No, that's really helpful. I think that's really important to point out. Simon, did you have any?
Yes. The last line of defense is to say, thank you for all these really tricky comments. You're basically asking me to write a completely different paper. And so either I'm going to have to pursue the paper that I wanted to write, or else I'm going to withdraw it and send it somewhere else. And Franklin and I know somebody that does this quite often. When they get trenchant comments, they get sent to a different journal and you just try again. And that's kind of annoying. And also it increases the labor of reviewers, because you have 2 for your first article or 3, and then you withdraw it, and then the other journal finds somebody else. Yeah, there's not much of a way around that, though. You've either got to address the comments or withdraw the paper, or convince the editor.
Right. Okay. No, I think that's been really, really helpful to the whole conversation, and I think sort of rounding off the discussion today around starting from submitting the papers and challenges around there, to how to address peer reviewers and the social contracts that are inherent in this whole process. So at which point I would like to take the opportunity to just thank both you, Simon and Franklin, for very, very, very impressive and very helpful discussion that I hope the participants were able to learn from. And and to say thank you to all the people who've attended, for your questions and for listening and for your attention. We do have another session scheduled for June, and we'll circulate the details for that. But again, thank you so very much to everyone, and have a good day. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.